Hello, traveler of thoughts and seeker of bedtime science. Tonight, as the hum of the world slows and your pillow molds itself into the shape of your favorite escape hatch, I invite you to imagine something quietly outrageous. Not galaxies, not black holes, not cosmic bangs and whimpers. Those usual suspects of late-night speculation. No, tonight we go in the opposite direction. We're not looking up. We're looking down into the crust, the strata, the patient stone that remembers everything, or at least tries to. What if we are not the first? Not the first builders, not the first dreamers, not the first anxious species to invent bad furniture and worry about the future? What if long before our pyramid, before our satellites, before even our obsession with bedtime science channels, there was another civilization, not mythical Atlantis with seahorses and tridents, not alien tourists dropping crop circles like calling cards. Something real, something born of this earth, something with nervous systems and hopes, intelligent in ways we may never quite map, a people who climbed to complexity and then disappeared so completely that the earth pressed delete and cleared its history cache. It sounds like science fiction, right? And it is sort of, but it's also a scientific question that has tiptoed around geology labs and cosmology conferences. You see, science has a way of flirting with the weird when no one is watching. What if it whispers to itself? We aren't the beginning of the story. It is not asking whether we'll dig up an iPhone in a coal seam or find a fossilized Wi-Fi router beneath Antarctica. It is subtler, more unsettling. The question is, could we even tell? If there had been another civilization millions of years ago, would the Earth have bothered to keep the receipts? Or would every trace, every bone, every city, every song and scribble have been recycled into soil and stone indistinguishable from the background hum of geology? You see, Earth is a terrible archivist. It doesn't believe in careful record keeping. It doesn't preserve diaries with neat ink or store photos in acid-free folders. Time doesn't just pass, it edits. It melts, buries, crushes, and shuffles. It turns cathedrals into gravel and bones into dust. Mountains rise like ambitious projects and crumble like failed ones. And somewhere in between, whatever fragile culture sits on the surface gets smeared, erased, and redrawn. If you've ever left a sandwich too long in the back of your fridge, you already understand geology's commitment to recycling. This is where the Silurian Hypothesis sneaks into the room. Named with a wink after a British sci-fi show where intelligent reptiles once ruled the planet. The hypothesis is no joke. It asks, what evidence would an advanced civilization leave in the geological record millions of years later? Would there be a layer of unusual chemicals, a spike in carbon isotopes, or an odd fingerprint in the rocks that screams, someone intelligent was here? Or would their entire story dissolve so thoroughly that even Sherlock Holmes with a rock hammer would shrug and walk away? Now, before we start imagining reptilian lawyers in stone skyscrapers or prehistoric accountants balancing ledgers with clay laptops, let's pause. Because civilization itself is a slippery word. We modern humans like to define it in flattering terms. Cities, writing, governments, skylines that make us feel tall. But that's a very narrow view, one based mostly on ourselves. Civilizations could take shapes far stranger. A civilization may not need skyscrapers at all. It could be a quiet network of knowledge, medicine, agriculture, or philosophy, none of which necessarily leaves behind a monumental skyline. Who's to say intelligence must always build a tower? But even if they did, the odds are stacked against their ruins lasting. Imagine a city built in a rainforest. In a few centuries, vines choke the walls, wood dissolve, stone crumbles, and the ground swallows the rest. Multiply that by 1,000,000 years, and you don't get ruins. You get dirt. Civilization becomes mulch. Even metal doesn't stand much of a chance. Iron rusts, copper tarnishes, stainless steel resists, but eventually succumbs. Unless sealed inside a mountain like an ancient sandwich in foil, it won't make it long enough for us to stumble upon. And even if it did, it would be almost impossible to distinguish from natural, or unless it was very obviously shaped. So much for skyscrapers. Even the best engineer on Earth can't beat rust plus 1,000,000 years. And yet here's where things get both funnier and eerier. Humans and all our inventive genius may not be leaving behind much in the way of durable buildings or gadgets either. Fast forward 1,000,000 years. New York subways would be flooded in days once the pumps stop. Glass shatters, steel collapses. Concrete crumbles surprisingly fast. Within a few decades, cities would look like wild gardens with rusty decorations. Give it a few centuries, and deer will be posing for selfies on what used to be Times Square. The squirrels will inherit Central Park. The cockroaches will win awards for persistence. And our proud architecture will be indistinguishable from a pile of oddly shaped rocks. So what does endure? Not the monuments, not the laptops, not the IKEA furniture mercifully. What endures is chemistry. The carbon dioxide we pump into the sky, the nitrogen we pour into soils, the isotopes scattered by nuclear tests, the fingerprints we leave not in stone but in air, water, and biology. If some far future geologist pokes around, they won't find intact smartphones. They'll find spikes in carbon levels, sharp deviations in the slow heartbeat of Earth's atmosphere. They'll notice a sudden extinction wave, a rearrangement of biomass, traces of plastics fossilized in layers of sediment. They'll scratch their heads and say, something very weird happened here around the Anthropocene, something that doesn't look natural. And that's the heart of the matter. The evidence of civilization may not be architecture, but anomaly. Not monuments, but misbehavior. The planet has its rhythms, carbon cycles, nitrogen cycles, patterns of biodiversity. When intelligence barges in, it throws off the beat. A naturalist, millions of years from now, might not find our buildings, but would see our clumsy fingerprints on the Earth's steady pulse. Which brings us back to the unsettling thought. What if someone else already did this? What if long before us, some intelligence rose, tinkered with the planet, and disappeared, leaving behind only chemical whispers and rock layers we haven't noticed or haven't interpreted that way? The absence of skyscrapers doesn't mean the absence of minds. It may just mean that geology is merciless and time is long. Earth is like that friend who borrows your stuff and never returns it, except the stuff is entire civilizations. Of course, the scientist's job is to be skeptical. Extraordinary claims demand extraordinary evidence. And so far, no one has unearthed a fossilized tablet inscribed made by the first earthlings, please recycle. No ancient toaster ovens or jet engines neatly pressed into sandstone. Nothing conclusive. But that doesn't make the question absurd. It just means it lives in that twilight zone of possibility, the space where evidence is weakest, but curiosity is strongest. It's a question that forces us to think about our own impermanence, about how even our loudest presence might one day be reduced to a quiet line of altered chemistry in the rocks. And maybe, just maybe, it's a question designed less for an answer and more for the wonder it awakens. Maybe the silence of deep time is not a refusal, but an invitation. An invitation to think about who we are, who we might become, and how fleeting civilizations really are, even when they think they're forever. So tonight, As you drift into that gentle state where dreams mix with half-remembered thoughts, imagine the possibility that we are not the first. Imagine the Earth as an old, forgetful librarian, shelves collapsing, books melting into one another. Somewhere in that library, maybe, is a missing chapter. Or maybe not. Either way, the thought itself is worth carrying into the dark. A lullaby sung not by certainty, but by curiosity. Imagine for a moment that the Earth keeps secrets the way the ocean does. Vast, heavy, and silent until something surfaces. Our continents are like passing thoughts, appearing and disappearing on the surface of a mind too ancient for us to comprehend. They rise, drift, and crash, carried by the slow ballet of plate tectonics. In this endless movement, mountains crumble into dust, rivers carve canyons with nothing but patience, and oceans swell to cover entire worlds. Civilizations, if they ever existed before ours, would have been swept along in this same grand choreography and erased just as easily. The Earth, after all, is not sentimental. It doesn't keep scrapbooks of its guests. It doesn't tape photos to the fridge door of history. Wood rots, metal rusts, bones dissolve. Even the hardest granite bends under pressure, softening and folding like dough beneath the weight of time. Think about that. Mountains, which seem immovable to us, are temporary decorations on a cake that is always rising, sinking, and being baked again. If mountains themselves can't last, what chance does your favorite coffee mug from the office have? Zero. Absolutely zero. This is why geologists often say the surface of the Earth is a restless thing. To us, a cliff looks permanent, a desert eternal, a mountain range everlasting. But to a geologist, to anyone who dares look at time the way the Earth does, all of it is in motion. Even the most solid rock is flowing, bending, or breaking, if you just speed up the film reel enough. Civilization, under this view, is a chalk doodle drawn on a blackboard during an earthquake. Lovely for a moment, erased in the next. And here comes a twist. If another civilization did exist millions of years ago, it wouldn't have left behind pyramids poking through the jungle or skyscrapers peeking out glaciers. Those are the dreams of movies, the guilty pleasures of late-night cable. The reality would be far more disappointing, at least for anyone hoping to play Indiana Jones. All that would remain would be traces, strange blips in chemistry, odd signatures in carbon layers, anomalies in isotope ratios, peculiar spikes in rare elements. Nothing flashy, nothing obvious, just tiny hints buried in the deep notebooks of geology. This is exactly what the Silurian Hypothesis asks us to consider. It's not about claiming lost continents or lizard empires with parliament sessions. It's about method. If there had been someone before us, someone clever enough to change a planet, how would we recognize them? And more importantly, how do we make sure we're not staring right at the evidence already, mistaking it for something else? For all we know, a strange chemical spike we chalk up to a volcanic eruption could just as easily be the exhaust fumes of a civilization that vanished before volcanoes took the blame. But the burden of proof here is colossal. Even our own civilization, with all its billions of people and relentless construction, would fade surprisingly quickly. If humans vanished tomorrow, here's how fast it would happen. Within days, subways flood. Within weeks, we'd split highways. Within decades, buildings sag, steel rusts, glass shatters, concrete crumbles. Within centuries, whole cities collapse into heaps that look suspiciously like hills. Nature is not lazy. It has an army of rain, roots, frost, and heat working full time. And unlike humans, nature never goes on coffee break. Give it 1,000,000 years, And what's left of our world? Probably not much. A stubborn bridge here, a cave full of rust there. Maybe the Eiffel Tower reduced to an oddly shaped iron deposit. Perhaps your favorite plastic straw immortalized in a thin layer of rock. A geological joke waiting for a future archaeologist to puzzle over. Behold, they'll say, the sacred tube of the ancient people, all while sipping their own drink through a device we cannot imagine. So how do you find a civilization in the deep past if even our own skyscrapers would be gone in less than a blink of geological time? You look not for monuments, but for mischief, for the marks that intelligence leaves when it tries to improve, exploit, or simply survive. Take agriculture, for example. Farming reshapes landscapes, changes soil chemistry, alters erosion patterns, and compacts the ground. Long after the farm itself is gone, its fingerprint lingers in the soil. Fertilizers leave chemical residues. Irrigation changes the chemistry of rivers. Forests vanish and turn into monocultures that collapse biodiversity. Even after centuries of abandonment, these scars whisper their story to anyone who knows how to listen. Or consider industry. Modern humans concentrate rare metals, extract ores, and scatter them in waste dumps. We produce synthetic chemicals unknown in nature. Plastics alone are a future fossil in the making. Stubborn little ghosts that may outlast our memory by millions of years. Nuclear tests leave isotopic fingerprints so distinctive that if geologists a million years from now see them, they'll know something unusual happened. That's the kind of evidence that might survive, even if every skyscraper, every city, every selfie we ever took is long gone. And yet here is where humility sneaks in. Even those chemical traces might not be enough. Earth has its own ways of producing spikes and anomalies. Volcanic eruptions can mimic industrial emissions. Meteor impacts can scatter metals globally. Natural climate shifts can leave signatures in carbon layers. The planet has a long history of impersonating civilization without even trying. So if we did find evidence of something odd, the question would not be, is this civilization, but could this be explained by anything else? The odds are stacked against the answer we secretly crave. This is the irony. If there was once another civilization, we might walk right past its ruins without ever noticing. The signs might be faint, folded into stone, brushed aside as just another volcanic oddity. It could be that the Earth has already shown us its buried secrets, but we lack the imagination to interpret them. It's like reading a diary in a language we don't know. The words are there, but the meaning slips through our fingers, and so we're left with a strange tension. On one hand, the idea that we're the very first intelligence is flattering. We're special, the pioneers of thought, the lone voice in a silent wilderness. On the other hand, the possibility that we're not the first is humbling. We're latecomers to a stage that's been set and cleared before. Both are possible. Both are unsettling. Both make bedtime either fascinating or impossible, depending on how prone you are to staring at the ceiling. But perhaps this is the real beauty of the question. It doesn't need an answer to matter. The mere act of asking shifts our view of ourselves. It forces us to look at our cities, our satellites, our carbon emissions, and realize just how fragile and temporary all of it is. We think we're eternal, but the Earth thinks otherwise. And maybe that's a joke. Civilizations always imagine they'll last, but geology plays the long game. And in that game, nothing built on the surface really wins. Not even us. So as you breathe, lying there with your eyes half closed, picture the Earth as a massive recycle machine. Civilizations go in one end, dust and stone come out the other. Maybe there were others before us. Maybe not. Maybe in 10 million years, someone else will wonder the same thing about us. their bedtime science program asking, were we truly the first? Or just another chapter in a book whose pages keep vanishing? And as that thought drifts across your mind, remember, it's not the skyscrapers that matter. It's the whispers, the little anomalies, the faint scars left behind when intelligence stirs the planet. Those may be all we ever leave. The strange thing about civilizations is how seriously they take themselves. Every society, from the first potter who said, "Look, I made a bowl," to the latest billionaire launching his fourth unnecessary rocket, believes it's building something that will last forever. Cities are laid down like signatures. Empires march as if permanence is guaranteed. And entire economies are built on the assumption that tomorrow looks roughly like today, but with better Wi-Fi. And yet, the Earth smiles, politely nods, and quietly begins sharpening its erasers. Because here's the secret. Permanence is not in the job description of a planet. Civilizations are loud, yes. They leave fireworks, lights visible from orbit, grand speeches recorded on golden records hurled into space. But beneath it all, they are fragile bubbles clinging to the skin of a restless world. Time pops bubbles without asking for permission. Take, for example, our obsession with monuments. We build pyramids, towers, domes, cathedrals. We engrave our names into stone as if stone is eternal. Spoiler alert, it isn't. Sand blows, frost shatters, rain washes. Nature has more tools than a medieval blacksmith, and it uses them with ruthless consistency. The pyramids look timeless to us, but that's only because we measure time in lifespans. To the Earth, they're flimsy paperweights that just haven't been filed away yet. Give them a few million years, and they'll be as anonymous as gravel in a driveway. This is why archaeologists are forced to be detectives of fragments. Even our own history, which is practically brand new in geological terms, is written in shards. A flint knife here, a pottery fragment there. A post hole that suggests maybe, possibly, someone once built a hut. Entire stories are reconstructed from crumbs, because crumbs are all that remain. Now stretch your imagination further. If it's this hard to piece together human societies only tens of thousands of years old, what chance do we have with something that lived millions of years ago? The odds are like trying to reconstruct a library from confetti that's already been through a paper shredder. Still, science is persistent. Geologists have proposed that if you really want to find ancient civilizations, don't look for the flashy stuff. Forget skyscrapers and highways. Look instead for what lingers even when no one wants it to. Chemical fingerprints, soil scars, isotopes that don't belong. Civilization, after all, is less about what it builds and more about how it misbehaves. Think of us humans. We've been around with factories for a blink of an eye, and already we've filled the atmosphere with more carbon than it knows what to do with. If some geologist 10 million years from now digs up our era, they won't find the Statue of Liberty. They'll find a weird spike in carbon dioxide, a suspicious drop in biodiversity, and a mysterious layer of fossilized flip-flops. The Silurian Hypothesis leans exactly on this kind of reasoning. It doesn't claim lizard bankers once handed out loans, or that ancient civilizations had their own version of social media, stone tablet talk, perhaps. It simply asks, what would remain if there had been someone before us? Could we recognize their fingerprints even if all the photos were burned? And just as uncomfortable, could their fingerprints be hiding in plain sight, already cataloged, but misfiled under weird volcanic event or funny mineral anomaly? Let's think about volcanoes for a second. They're loud, dramatic, and messy. Basically the rock world's equivalent of a toddler throwing a tantrum. They scatter metals, alter the air, shift the climate. And yet, if you zoom out, Their traces in the record look remarkably like what an industrial civilization might leave behind. A sudden chemical spike, an odd layer of ash, a drastic shift in the climate. So if there was once a society burning fuel and filling the sky with smoke, how would we tell the difference? Unless they left us a billboard that said, "Civilization here, sorry about the mess," we'd have a very tough time. And then, of course, there's the ocean. Our ancestors loved coastlines. And so do we. They offer trade, fertile land, pretty sunsets, and an endless source of inspiration for bad poetry. But coastlines are also temporary. Sea levels rise and fall. Land lifts and sinks. Coastlines migrate like indecisive tourists who can't decide where to settle. If a civilization ever built its cities along ancient shores, those cities are now drowned, buried, or eroded beyond recognition. And if you think archaeology is hard on land, try doing it under a mile of seawater with currents rearranging your evidence. It's like trying to piece together a crime scene while someone keeps vacuuming the floor. Even myths seem to echo this difficulty. Across cultures, from Sumerians to Hindus to Norse storytellers, there's the recurring theme of a great flood wiping away a world. Perhaps it's coincidence, a poetic way of describing seasonal rains or real regional catastrophes. Or perhaps it's memory, stretched and reshaped over millennia. A whisper of how fragile entire societies can be when water decides to reclaim what's hers. Floods don't need permission slips, and they don't care about urban planning. They simply roll in and remind civilizations that permanence is a funny dream. And that's the haunting thought. Maybe the Earth has already hosted minds before. Maybe they left behind only the faintest chemical hiccups in the rock record. Maybe we've already logged them, labeled them as odd, and moved on. Imagine a graduate student staring at a sediment core, scratching their head and writing. Unusual concentration of carbon here, probably volcanoes. And just like that, the evidence of an entire civilization gets filed under meh. If they had art, music, philosophy, science, all of it reduced to a footnote, shrugged away by the relentless shrug of geology. The silence, then, is not necessarily an answer. It might just be the default setting of deep time. We could be alone in history, the first and only species to reach this level of complexity. Or we could be one in a series of experiments, each one rising, shimmering briefly, and vanishing without so much as a gravestone. Both possibilities are equally dizzying. Both make us small, and both should make us laugh, if only to keep from panicking. Because if the Earth has already hosted other civilizations, it has also already erased them. And if it can erase them, it can erase us. Permanence is not guaranteed. The Eiffel Tower may think it's impressive, but to the next ice age, it's just a particularly pointy paperclip. Silicon Valley may imagine it's eternal, but the Earth has plans to recycle it into sand. And all our digital archives, our tweets and texts and cat videos, they'll vanish faster than a USB stick in the wash. The universe will not weep for lost memes. So perhaps the real question isn't whether there were others before us. Perhaps the question is, what traces will we leave? Will future geologists see our layer and say, "Ah yes, the humans, carbon enthusiasts with a flair for plastic"? Or will we, too, vanish so completely that our existence becomes an open question? A bedtime speculation whispered by another species under another sky? Whatever the answer, it's oddly comforting. Because even in the face of erasure, the act of wondering makes us part of a larger story. To ask if we're the first is to admit we're not the last. Somewhere in the folds of time, others may wonder the same thing about us. And that, if nothing else, is a kind of immortality. Not in monuments, but in curiosity. If you really want to know, Whether a civilization ever existed, you can't rely on monuments. Monuments are vain. They crumble, topple, or get redecorated by vines that clearly never asked for planning permission. You also can't rely on gadgets. A smartphone in your pocket feels indestructible when it falls on your tile floor. But in geological time, it has the durability of a soap bubble. Data? Please. Hard drives lose coherence in a decade, optical discs rot, books burn, and even stone carvings fade like doodles in sand. The universe does not believe in warranty extensions. So if you want to play detective in deep time, you must look not for things, but for ghosts. Not the artifacts themselves, but the strange imprints they leave behind. A civilization might vanish, but its chemical signature is harder to hide. It's like trying to sneak out of a bakery without leaving the smell of bread behind. Let's start with carbon, that ever-present tattletale. When humans burn fossil fuels, we don't just pump carbon dioxide into the sky. We pump ancient carbon into it. Carbon that was once locked away in plants and creatures millions of years old. And this carbon has a different isotopic ratio than the stuff cycling through the atmosphere naturally. To future geologists, it will look like a sharp, sudden spike. The Earth's calm rhythm disrupted by what appears to be an enthusiastic bonfire. If another civilization had burned fossil fuels millions of years ago, it might have left a similar isotopic oddity, one we've possibly already cataloged and shrugged off as strange climate event. Then there's nitrogen. Our fertilizers, bless them, leave chemical fingerprints that linger in soils long after the crops are gone. Agriculture compacts soil, alters its layers, and leaves behind traces of nutrients and toxins. In a million years, those layers may not scream cornfield, but they will whisper somebody was meddling here. If another civilization tilled and fertilized its land, the echoes might still be faintly detectable in sediment cores. Of course, a skeptic could say, but volcanoes, but floods, but natural anomalies. And they'd be right. Nature is a trickster, perfectly capable of faking the signs of civilization, which makes the search a constant argument between imagination and evidence. Now, consider plastics. Oh yes, our beloved indestructible plastics. Bottles, straws, bags, toys shaped like ducks, all destined for immortality in the fossil record. Plastics are polymers designed to resist decay, which is why they are so irritating in the ocean. Over millions of years, they may break down into smaller particles, but many will fossilize in sediments. Imagine a future geologist pulling up a rock layer sprinkled with microplastic confetti. To them, it will look like nature decided to experiment with bright colors, unaware that it was just us binge wrapping our snacks. And then we arrive at the fireworks of evidence, nuclear isotopes. Unlike carbon or nitrogen, which nature has been juggling for eons, nuclear fallout is distinct. The isotopes created by nuclear tests are rare in nature. They decay slowly, leaving long-lasting fingerprints. Even if all our cities vanish, the record of our atomic enthusiasm will linger in rocks and soils for hundreds of thousands of years. If there were ever another civilization that discovered nuclear energy and got a little too curious, the isotopic echoes might still be buried somewhere. To mistake those for volcanic activity would be like mistaking a disco ball for the moon, technically shiny. But the context matters. And let's not forget metals. Humans mine rare earth elements, concentrate them, and scatter them globally in waste and electronics. Normally, these elements are found in small, localized deposits. If future scientists find a suspiciously even spread of them in sediments, it will look odd, like someone spilled the periodic table across the planet. If an ancient civilization did something similar, concentrated metals in unnatural ways. Its ghost might still glimmer faintly in the geochemical record. Of course, here's the punchline. Every one of these signals can be faked by nature. Volcanic eruptions alter carbon and nitrogen levels. Meteor impacts scatter metals. Natural nuclear reactors, yes, they exist. Ask the Oklo reactor in Gabon. Can produce isotopes without any help from intelligent species. The Earth is a chaotic chemist with a sense of humor, constantly producing phenomena that mimic civilization's fingerprints. Which means even if we stumble upon the traces of another species' mischief, proving it was intelligent mischief is like trying to prove your cat deliberately knocked over your glass of water. Suspicious, yes. Conclusive, not really. This, in fact, is what makes the Silurian Hypothesis so humbling. It doesn't say there was another civilization. It says, even if there was, could we ever be sure? Evidence fades, signals overlap, natural processes imitate artificial ones. To stand in front of a rock core and declare, this is proof of intelligence, is risky business. Science, after all, demands extraordinary evidence, and geology, bless its stubborn heart, prefers to hand out puzzles with missing pieces. Meanwhile, humans continue leaving their fingerprints everywhere, as if auditioning for the fossil record. Concrete, for example, seems solid, but in humid climates it crumbles within centuries. Steel rusts, glass shatters, yet the soil remembers. Agriculture rewrites landscapes. Cities change erosion patterns. Roads alter water flow. Deforestation transforms biodiversity. Our greatest monument might not be the Great Wall of China, but the odd chemical layer left behind when we turned forests into farmland. Future geologists might never know what a smartphone looked like, but they'll know we rearranged ecosystems with gusto. And if we're honest, that's a little funny. We build towers and satellites hoping they'll define us. But the true mark of our civilization might be fertilizer residues and plastic crumbs. Imagine aliens arriving millions of years from now, digging up a thin layer of plastic, carbon spikes, and isotopes and concluding, these beings worshipped a god named polyester, and their rituals involved scattering bottle caps across oceans. Not entirely wrong, but not exactly how we'd want to be remembered, which circles us back to the question, if another civilization had risen and fallen long ago, would we have the tools to notice? Or have we already walked past their story, misfiled as a natural oddity? Could some ancient civilization have left its calling card in a layer of stone, waiting patiently for someone to ask the right question? It's possible. But if so, the evidence is faint, the kind that requires not just microscopes, but imagination. The Earth doesn't preserve civilizations the way libraries preserve books. It preserves them the way the tide preserves sandcastles. Briefly, partially. And only if the tide is feeling generous. Which means the real mystery is not whether civilizations have existed before us. It's whether any of them managed to leave behind a trace stubborn enough to outlast the erasing hand of deep time. And as you lie there tonight, drifting between wakefulness and sleep, remember this. Even if the Earth has hosted countless civilizations before us, all their wisdom, art, and noise may be compressed into nothing more than a peculiar blip in the chemistry of a rock. A whisper that says, something unusual happened here once, and nothing more. And perhaps that is the greatest cosmic joke of all. Not that civilizations disappear, but that the planet barely bothers to notice. The Earth may forget, but humans are stubborn. When stone crumbles and metal rusts, when the written word fades into dust, stories sometimes remain. Myths, legends, whispered memories pass from voice to voice, from fire to fire. They stretch and twist with every telling, but they endure. And in some peculiar way, They may be the longest-lasting fossils a civilization can leave behind, not in rock, but in imagination. Consider the flood, from Sumeria to Greece, from India to Scandinavia. The theme repeats with uncanny consistency. A vast deluge, waters rising to wash away the old world. A handful of survivors climbing mountains or building boats. Humanity rebooted after catastrophe. The details shift, but the rhythm is familiar. A reset, a cleansing, an ending that makes room for a beginning. Now, skeptics rightly note that floods are universal because water is universal. Rivers overflow, seas surge, monsoons arrive with more enthusiasm than anyone asked for. It makes sense that cultures around the world would each invent their own great flood stories, because floods are simply part of life. And yet, there's something tantalizing about the persistence of the theme. Why floods? Why so many versions of the same script, separated by oceans and centuries? Perhaps it is coincidence, or perhaps it is memory, a collective echo of something so catastrophic that it imprinted itself in the deepest grooves of human imagination. The earth may erase stone tablets, but brains, oddly enough, sometimes keep whispers alive far longer. Imagine for a moment that an earlier civilization faced its own great ending. Perhaps climate change swept through, or glaciers melted, or seas rose to reclaim cities built foolishly close to the edge. Imagine those survivors, if any, trying to tell their story without writing, without monuments, with nothing but words and metaphors. The waters came, they'd say. The world was washed away, and their children and their children's children would repeat it until it became myth. By the time it reached us, it would look like a fairy tale, tucked between gods and monsters. And yet, it might still carry the faintest shadow of truth. This is the cruel comedy of myth. It survives, but it refuses to hand us clarity. It says something happened, but never tells us exactly what. A flood, yes. But was it a river bursting its banks, a tsunami, or the slow drowning of coastlines as seas crept higher? Or was it metaphor, an allegory for change, rebirth, and the impermanence of order? We cannot know. Myth is a mirror, not a map. But let's indulge ourselves for a moment. Imagine you are an archaeologist, not of stones, but of stories. You dig through cultures the way geologists dig through strata, peeling back layers of narrative. At the bottom, you find a recurring motif. Water destroys, a few survive, a new world begins. Could this be the fossilized imprint of memory? Could our myths be the most stubborn remnants of forgotten civilizations? If so, it's almost funny. Civilizations pour their energy into monuments of stone and steel, believing those will endure. But maybe the things that outlast them are bedtime stories told to frighten children. Maybe the true immortality of a culture isn't its architecture, but its metaphors. Of course, we should be careful not to leap from myth to proof. Stories do not count as evidence in geology. A scientist who submits a paper citing the Epic of Gilgamesh as a data source will not be applauded. And yet, in the quiet hours of night, we are allowed to wonder. What if myth is simply a coded message smuggled through time? Not precise, not reliable, but persistent. A rumor carried forward when all else is erased. And there's a mischievous lesson in this. If humanity wanted to ensure our own memory lasts for millions of years, we probably shouldn't build more skyscrapers. We should probably just tell really good stories. Stories catchy enough, strange enough, sticky enough to be told and retold until whoever comes next still hears them, long after our towers are mulch. Imagine if millions of years from now, A species gathers around a fire and repeats the strange myth of people who once built metal birds that flew in the sky, who lit up the night with artificial stars, who drowned in their own plastic oceans. They'll laugh, call it fantasy, and go to sleep, and they'll never know it was us. Which raises another delicious possibility. Maybe we're already repeating the myths of civilizations that came before. Maybe the stories of floods, fires, gods, and forgotten ages aren't inventions of ours, but inheritances. If Earth has hosted minds before us, maybe their only surviving artifacts are carved not in stone, but in the fragile vault of memory, passed along not by books, but by tongues. And maybe that is the one thing geology cannot erase: the persistence of narrative. Still, it is fragile. Myths mutate, shift, and blur. They are translated, mistranslated, dramatized, censored, forgotten, rediscovered. To treat them as literal evidence is reckless. To treat them as completely irrelevant is arrogant. Somewhere between the two lies a tantalizing possibility that myths are not proof but clues. Clues that point to how societies grappled with the reality of impermanence. Whether human or not, every culture eventually realizes the same thing. The world can erase you. And in that realization, they tell stories, desperate, poetic attempts to resist silence. It's comforting in a strange way. Even if civilizations vanish without a trace of their tools, their stories may echo in ours. We may carry fragments of forgotten voices without ever realizing it. And if we do, then in a sense, we are not entirely alone. We are the inheritors of whispers. So tonight, as you drift toward sleep, imagine the flood. Imagine countless versions of it, told by countless mouths, across countless centuries. Imagine that somewhere behind the metaphor lies a memory, not of gods, but of civilizations swallowed by time. Maybe human, maybe not, maybe just one of many. And maybe, just maybe, the flood is not just a story of water, but of forgetting itself. And if that's the case, then myths are less bedtime entertainment and more survival strategy. They are civilization's attempt to leave a trace when all else fails. The message is not this is exactly what happened. The message is something happened and it mattered. And that is often all we can hope to carry forward. When we picture civilization, we instinctively summon certain images. Towers piercing clouds, libraries stacked with wisdom, machines humming in rhythm, writing etched into walls. We imagine tools, artifacts, the physical anchors of knowledge. But the earth is a magician. It has a way of making such anchors vanish, of slipping them into its endless shuffle until they're indistinguishable from the background. Take stone tools, humanity's oldest calling card. They are stubborn, resilient, practically immortal compared to wood or metal. And yet even here, the record is deceptive. Most stone tools are simple flakes, barely distinguishable from rocks chipped by accident. A pebble used to grind grain may never be shaped in a way we'd recognize. A sharp fragment used to cut meat may be indistinguishable from a shard broken off by frost. Archaeologists spend lifetimes debating whether a particular stone is tool or just rock. Sometimes the only difference is intent, and intent does not fossilize. Now stretch that thought further. What if an earlier civilization never relied heavily on stone or metal? What if their technology took forms we would not even recognize? Perhaps they mastered materials that decayed completely, or knowledge systems that required no physical infrastructure. Imagine a society with advanced medicine, astronomy, and philosophy, but little need for towering structures or heavy industry. If their artifacts were made of organic materials, every trace of them could vanish in a blink of geological time. the Earth would fold them back into its cycles, and we would never know they existed. Even our own durable artifacts are laughably fragile when time is measured in millions of years. Metals, which feel so solid in our hands, betray us quickly. Iron rusts almost instantly when neglected. Copper oxidizes into green dust. Even stainless steel eventually yields. Unless sealed in extraordinary conditions deep underground, shielded from water and air, they will not last. And even then, a lump of corroded metal and stone may look like nothing more than a curious or deposit, without context, without unmistakable signs of design. How would we ever know? Think of the coal artifact stories. Those tantalizing 19th century tales of miners finding hammers or objects embedded in lumps of coal. Most of these are folklore misinterpretations or hoaxes, yet they speak to a yearning. The desire to find undeniable evidence of someone before us. Because fragments and whispers are not enough. We crave a clear aha moment, a gear circuit, a fossilized machine etched with the equivalent of made in Earth 20 million BC. But geology does not hand out such luxuries. It hands out riddles. And here lies the cruelest trick of deep time. Absence is ambiguous. The fact that we find no tools from a hypothetical earlier civilization does not prove they never existed. It may only prove that their remains blended seamlessly into the fabric of the earth, or that we've already mistaken them for something natural. After all, we're not trained to see civilization in a rock. If a smooth pebble in your garden was once an ancient knife, how would you know? We walk past potential artifacts every day, blind to what they might be. There is also the question of scale. We assume civilization must look like us, global, industrial, leaving a planetary fingerprint. But what if earlier intelligences were smaller, more localized, less obsessed with leaving a mark? What if they lived in harmony with their environment, never altering the planet enough to leave geochemical scars? They might have had knowledge, art, even technology, but without sprawling industry. Their traces would be faint, almost invisible. In that case, their memory is not gone. It is simply undetectable by the tools we've chosen to use. It's a humbling thought that intelligence does not always shout. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it leaves behind nothing more than ideas, carried briefly, extinguished quietly, erased utterly. We equate progress with monuments, but knowledge does not always demand skyscrapers. A society could chart the stars with astonishing precision and yet build nothing taller than a hut. They could heal disease without ever constructing hospitals of steel and glass. They could cultivate philosophy, art, and wonder without leaving a single mark that would outlast a season of rain. Invisibility is not just possible, it may be the rule. Think of our own digital knowledge. We call it the information age, as if it were eternal. But its foundation is laughably flimsy. Hard drives fail within decades. Optical disks degrade. Solid-state storage loses its charge. Even paper, one of the better options, crumbles. If every server farm in the world shut down tonight, how long before the vast library of human knowledge evaporated into silence? A few centuries, perhaps. A blink in geological time. The sum of our history, cat videos and all, gone like smoke. If we, with billions of people and global infrastructure, could be reduced to nothing, how much easier would it be for a smaller, earlier civilization to vanish without a trace? There's another angle to this invisibility. Tools without wear. Archaeologists identify tools not just by shape, but by the marks of use. Polish from grinding, nicks from cutting, grooves from repeated action. But if tools are discarded before much use, or if they're designed in ways that don't produce distinctive wear, they blend into nature. A cutting edge that is used once and abandoned is geologically identical to a naturally sharp rock. If you think about it, the odds of detecting civilization in such cases are vanishingly slim. And then there's the possibility of civilizations that didn't build at all. We assume that technology must manifest in objects, but perhaps intelligence could express itself in other ways. In language, music, oral traditions, or even biological adaptations. Imagine a society that encoded knowledge in memory, in ritual, in genetic design. To them, technology might have been unnecessary, even wasteful. Their legacy would be wisdom carried in minds that are now dust, leaving no trace. To such a civilization, the idea of building stone monuments might have seemed as ridiculous as we find carving hashtags into cave walls. The silence this leaves is profound. We search for ruins, for tools, for the physical crumbs of industry. But perhaps what we should be searching for is not artifacts, but disruptions. Not machines, but anomalies. Not structures, but absences. For intelligence may not always manifest in skyscrapers or circuits. It may bloom and fade in forms we don't yet know how to see. And here is where the humor creeps in, because the irony is almost too sharp. If another civilization ever existed, we may already have walked past its remains, not noticing, not caring, perhaps even stepping on a fragment and calling it a weird-shaped rock. Somewhere in a museum drawer mislabeled and forgotten, there could be an artifact that doesn't quite fit, patiently waiting for the right question. But until someone dares to see it differently, it will remain invisible. So perhaps the real lesson is this. The Earth does not promise us recognition. It does not owe us permanence. Civilization is a guest, and geology is the landlord. And the landlord has a strict policy. No long-term storage. What survives is not necessarily what mattered most. What survives is simply what managed to dodge the erasers of time. Silence is not just an absence of sound. In deep time, silence is an abyss. It stretches between fossils, yawns across broken strata, whispers between the fragments of pottery and bone we manage to rescue from oblivion. Archaeologists and geologists do not work with abundance. They work with scraps and voids, with the silence between clues. And in that silence we build our stories. When you look at a geological timeline, you see layer after layer of rock, compressed diaries written by oceans, volcanoes, deserts, and forests. But between these pages are missing chapters. Whole epics vanish, torn out by erosion, subduction, or metamorphosis. The Earth doesn't keep a complete journal. It scribbles, doodles, crumples pages, throws some in the fire, and occasionally drops the whole notebook into the ocean. We're lucky to read even a fraction. This is the paradox of looking for civilizations older than our own. The deeper you go into the record, the louder the silence becomes. Fossils are rare. Artifacts are rarer. Evidence of culture is practically a miracle. Even with humans who have been busily making things for tens of thousands of years, we mostly find fragments. A chipstone, a scrap of textile in a desert, a broken piece of pottery. It's astonishing that we can reconstruct so much from so little. But if you push the clock back millions of years, the silence swallows almost everything. Think of the surface of the Earth as a chalkboard constantly being erased and rewritten. Civilizations, if they ever existed before us, would be written in faint chalk, swept away by rain, rubbed out by tectonics, smudged by erosion. What remains? The faintest traces, maybe a ghost of writing left in the corners, barely legible. Expecting a neat, intact record of civilization is like expecting a tidy shopping list after a thunderstorm. Optimistic, but hopeless. And here is the irony. Silence itself is a kind of evidence. The very fact that so much disappears tells us how fragile civilizations are. It reminds us that even our loudest impact may eventually fade to nothing. Silence doesn't mean never existed. It means if it did exist, the Earth didn't care enough to keep the receipts. That indifference is perhaps the most humbling discovery of all. Scientists call this the problem of signal versus noise. Nature produces anomalies all the time. Volcanic eruptions, asteroid impacts, sudden climate shifts. They leave behind blips in chemistry, odd layers in rock. These are the noises of geology. If an earlier civilization left behind similar blips, their signals would be buried in that same noise. We might already be looking at their remains without realizing it, shrugging them off as just another volcanic hiccup. The silence is not empty. It's crowded with noise, which is almost worse. And yet, silence also tempts us. Humans hate not knowing. We fill gaps with stories, with myths, with imaginative reconstructions. We see absence and turn it into presence. Sometimes that leads to great discoveries. Other times it leads to conspiracy theories about pyramids built by Martians. Silence can be a canvas, and we are compulsive painters. But perhaps that's appropriate, because even if we never find proof of another civilization, silence itself is worth contemplating. It tells us something profound, that permanence is an illusion, that memory is fragile, that even intelligence is not guaranteed a long run. Silence tells us that the Earth is patient, and we are brief. Humor helps here. Picture a geologist in the distant future, drilling a core and finding a thin layer rich in carbon, plastics, and isotopes. They pause and say, "Strange. This looks like a planetary industrial accident." Their colleague shrugs. "Volcanoes again, probably." And just like that, the memory of our species is dismissed with a sigh and a footnote. Our skyscrapers and space probes reduced to a clerical error. That is the comedy of silence. Even when we shout, the Earth may record us as a mumble. This makes me think of museums. We fill them with artifacts, vases, tools, statues, as if collecting enough fragments will save us from silence. And in a way, it works. A clay shard does resist time better than flesh. But museums themselves are fragile, too. Buildings fall, archives burn, databases crash. The silence waits patiently outside their doors, and eventually it always gets in. So what do we do with this silence? We could fear it, despair at the thought that even our greatest achievements may vanish, or we could treat it as perspective. Silence reminds us not to overestimate our permanence, but also not to underestimate the possibility of others. If silence hides us so easily, perhaps it has hidden others as well. We may not be the first. We may simply be the latest in a line of guests whose stories the Earth has chosen not to preserve. There's a mischievous comfort in that. Imagine that civilizations bloom like rare flowers, mostly behind little more than pollen, a chemical trace, a subtle anomaly, a hint of their existence. To demand more is unreasonable. To expect silence to confess is like expecting a locked diary to read itself aloud. But the possibility that others have come and gone adds depth to our own fleeting moment. It reminds us that intelligence might not be unique, but it is always temporary. And perhaps that's the ultimate role of silence, not to answer, but to teach humility, to remind us that civilizations, however proud, are not exceptions to geology. They are chapters in a book written on paper that burns itself. And if we want to be remembered, we cannot rely on the planet to do the job for us. We must tell stories, carve myths, leave signals in chemistry, perhaps even scatter a few messages into space. Because here on Earth, silence is the default. So tonight, as the silence of the room begins to match the silence of deep time, imagine those vast stretches where nothing speaks. Imagine layers of stone that hold no voices, no artifacts, no ruins, only the patient memory of oceans and mountains. Somewhere in that silence, perhaps, are the erased civilizations we dream about. Or perhaps there is only emptiness. Either way, the silence itself is an answer, though it refuses to tell us what it means. The ocean is both generous and cruel. It is where life began, and it is where most of life's history now sleeps, layered in sediments, dissolved in salt, hidden beneath shifting tides. If Earth has secrets, and it certainly does, the ocean is where it keeps the juiciest ones. Coastlines, after all, are irresistible. Humans love them. Our ancestors camped by rivers and harbors, built ports and palaces on the edges of the sea, and even today, most of our great cities cling stubbornly to the coast like children refusing to leave the playground. The reasons are obvious: fertile land, easy trade, fish on demand, sunsets that sell real estate. If any earlier civilization existed, it is not unreasonable to guess that they too built their worlds where land and sea meet. But here's the twist. Coastlines are terrible at keeping records. They are not fixed lines, but restless borders. They advance and retreat, sink and rise, bend and break. Tides shift daily. Storms redraw maps overnight. Over millennia, ice ages pull oceans back like curtains, then send them surging forward again. A city built on the shore 50,000 years ago could now be dozens of miles underwater, or ground into rubble by shifting sands. In geological time, a coastline is a doodle in the sand, beautiful for a moment, then erased by the next wave. Which means if a past civilization loved the coast as much as we do, its ruins are now lost beneath the sea. And if you think archaeology is hard on dry land where you can actually breathe, try doing it under a mile of seawater. Divers can only reach so far. Sonar scans are incomplete. Sediments bury everything in slow, heavy blankets. The ocean does not make it easy to find its secrets. It is less an open archive and more a locked vault guarded by pressure, darkness, and the occasional angry squid. Consider how difficult underwater archaeology is today, even with modern technology. Shipwrecks from a few centuries ago are hard enough to study. Wooden hulls dissolve. Metals corrode. Entire vessels sink into the mud. And those are recent shallow wrecks. Now imagine searching for structures millions of years old, buried under sediments, ground down by currents, swallowed by tectonic shifts. The odds are laughable. It would be easier to find a single grain of rice in a rice field after a storm, and to prove the rice was once part of a sushi roll. Yet the ocean does keep some records. Sediment cores drilled from the seabed reveal climate histories, extinction events, and chemical anomalies. In these quiet, compressed diaries of the deep, we might one day stumble across the fingerprints of something unusual. A spike in metals, a sudden shift in isotopes, a strange layer of synthetic-looking compounds. But again, the challenge is interpretation. Nature is a prolific trickster. Volcanic ash, asteroid dust, hydrothermal vents, all of them scatter odd signatures across the ocean floor. To distinguish civilization from geology having fun would require not just data, but context, imagination, and courage. And so we return to the tantalizing thought. Maybe the ocean already holds the evidence we seek. Maybe there are ruins buried in continental shelves, cities drowned long before pyramids were dreamed of. Maybe there are chemical layers in deep sediments that look suspiciously artificial. But no one has asked the right question yet. We may already have brushed past the fingerprints of forgotten civilizations, filing them away under odd and moving on. After all, science is cautious. Without extraordinary proof, anomalies are just anomalies. Humor helps here. Imagine a future geologist, millions of years from now, digging into the seabed and finding a thin layer of fossilized plastic straws. What curious creatures, they'll say. They engineered tubes solely to sip sugar water, a most inefficient species. Or imagine them finding a rusted subway car entombed in sediment. Clearly, they'll conclude, this was a ceremonial vessel, perhaps for worship. The people must have gathered underground to chant and exchange tokens, which, come to think of it, isn't entirely wrong. The tragedy and comedy of the ocean is that it hides almost everything. For every relic it preserves, it buries 1,000 more beyond recognition. It is both cradle and grave, birth and oblivion. And because civilizations are drawn to the shore, it may be that most of their stories are drowned. If others existed before us, the ocean may have swallowed their voices whole, digesting them into silence. Yet even silence leaves ripples. The ocean floor is layered with the record of extinctions, of sudden climatic shifts, of chemical rearrangements. It tells us when the dinosaurs vanished, when glaciers surged, when volcanoes coughed across the sky. If a civilization ever altered coastlines, poisoned seas, or scattered synthetic waste in currents, some trace of that might still linger. Not monuments, not temples, but residue, the ghost of industry trapped in mud. And that perhaps is the strangest thought of all. If civilizations leave legacies, those legacies may not be visible or majestic. They may not be monuments rising from the sea like Atlantis in the cartoons. They may be as humble and anticlimactic as a blip in a sediment core. The earth does not record glory. It records chemistry. And if there is a message waiting for us at the bottom of the ocean, it will not be carved in marble. It will be scribbled in isotopes, in strange concentrations of metals, in the stubborn persistence of plastics. So the ocean holds two possibilities. Either it is the grave of forgotten civilizations, their remains irretrievably lost, or it is the archive of their faintest fingerprints, waiting for us to notice. Either way, it refuses to make things easy, and maybe that is fitting. If civilizations rise and fall like tides, it makes sense that the ocean, with its endless rhythm of erasure and renewal, would be both cradle and tomb. So as you lie there tonight, listening perhaps to the faint hum of your own breath, a private ocean in miniature, imagine the great seas of Earth rolling back and forth across time. Imagine cities drowned, memories swallowed, myths born from the sound of waves erasing worlds. Imagine divers in the far future, searching the seabed for clues, puzzling over a fragment of plastic or a corroded gear, wondering whether it meant anything at all. And imagine the ocean, smiling its wide, blue smile, refusing to say. Every so often, when people dig deep enough into the earth, something odd turns up. A fragment that looks suspiciously deliberate. A pattern in stone that seems too regular. An object that doesn't quite match its surroundings. These are the anomalies, the little hiccups in geology's otherwise tidy narrative. And though most of them are explained away, misidentified minerals contamination, the overactive imagination of a bored miner, they fuel a persistent question. What if some of them are real? What if hidden in these fragments is the whisper of a civilization erased? In the 19th and early 20th centuries, miners occasionally reported finding curious objects inside lumps of coal, a chain, a bell, a small metal sphere. These tales spread quickly, often exaggerated, sometimes outright invented. Most were dismissed as hoaxes or misunderstandings, objects that had slipped into seams through cracks, or modern items mistaken for ancient ones. Yet the stories endure not because they are convincing, but because they tap into our hunger for evidence. We want so badly to find the unmistakable artifact, the smoking gun of a forgotten age. But geology is a trickster. Coal seams are messy places, riddled with fractures and intrusions. A drop tool can find its way in. Minerals can crystallize into shapes that look engineered. Nature has an uncanny talent for mimicry, sculpting forms that tickle our brains with the suggestion of design. A perfect sphere in a rock? Probably a concretion. A metallic lump? Likely pyrite or hematite. Yet the temptation remains. We look at these curiosities and whisper, "What if?" And perhaps we should, because every so often, anomalies do matter. Plate tectonics, after all, was once dismissed as nonsense, based on odd observations about continents fitting together. Fossilized microbes in ancient rocks were once considered implausible, until microscopes caught up. Science advances not only by explaining anomalies away, but by sometimes admitting that the anomaly was the truth all along. The trick is knowing which anomalies to take seriously. If an earlier civilization did exist, its remnants might not look like gleaming machines or ornate temples. They might look like oddities. Fragments too regular, patterns too strange, compositions that don't match their matrix. The challenge is interpretation. Imagine finding a small, sharp-edged stone embedded in sandstone. Is it a tool or just a rock that happened to break that way? Imagine finding a lump of alloy deep underground. Is it evidence of industry or a natural deposit formed in some bizarre geological process? Without context, without multiple lines of evidence, it is almost impossible to say. This is the cruel riddle of deep time. Context is the first thing to vanish. A tool without a site is just a rock. A shard without a culture is just debris. Civilizations are not preserved as wholes. They're dismantled, scattered, misfiled. By the time we find their remains, they may no longer resemble civilization at all. And so we're left with tantalizing scraps and stubborn questions. Could some of the anomalies we've already found be misinterpreted traces of intelligence? A layer of metal too rich to be volcanic. A chemical spike too sudden to be natural. A fragment that seems suspiciously crafted? Or are we simply seeing patterns where none exist, weaving stories into the random fabric of stone? Humans, after all, are compulsive pattern seekers. Show us clouds and we'll see animals. Show us stars and we'll draw constellations. Show us a rock with a regular shape and we'll imagine a civilization. This is both our strength and our weakness. It helps us discover, but it also makes us gullible. The earth is full of natural phenomena that mimic design, and our minds are eager to assign purpose. The line between discovery and daydream is a thin one. Yet even skeptics must admit, anomalies deserve attention, if only because every once in a while they reveal something new. A misfit fossil can rewrite evolutionary history. A strange mineral can point to unknown geological processes. And who's to say that one day, one anomaly will turn out to be what we've been waiting for? A fragment that does not fit any natural explanation. A clue that intelligence once walked here before us. Humor makes the waiting easier. Imagine, for instance, a geologist stumbling upon a perfectly square block buried deep in stone. After careful study, they conclude, yes, this is a natural formation, probably basalt. But what if it isn't? What if it's the last brick of a forgotten building? The final survivor of an ancient wall, mistaken for nothing more than an unusually tidy rock. The thought is absurd, yes. But so is much of science before it becomes obvious. Perhaps the real lesson is this. Anomalies are not proof, but invitations. They ask us to look closer, to question assumptions, to resist the easy shrug of natural. They remind us that the line between natural and artificial may blur over deep time, that what looks ordinary may hide extraordinary origins. And even if most anomalies turn out to be false alarms, the act of asking keeps the question alive. And maybe that's the point. If there were civilizations before us, they may not have left grand monuments. They may have left only anomalies scattered like breadcrumbs in the stone. Most of those breadcrumbs would have been eaten by time, but perhaps a few remain odd, confusing, resistant to explanation, enough to make us pause, tilt our heads, and wonder what if. So tonight, as you drift toward the quiet edge of sleep, picture those anomalies, a mysterious layer in the rock, a fragment that doesn't belong, a pattern too neat to ignore. Imagine them not as accidents, but as whispers of a story the earth almost erased, but not quite. Whispers that say, something happened here, something unusual, something intelligent, perhaps. And whether those whispers are real or imagined, they are powerful, because they remind us that silence is never absolute, and that even in the deep forgetting of geology, a few strange notes may still linger. Notes that sound suspiciously like memory. Science at its heart is cautious. It tiptoes. It measures. It demands evidence. And then it demands that evidence be checked, rechecked, poked, prodded, replicated, and reluctantly accepted only when all excuses to doubt have been exhausted. It is a noble system, a shield against wishful thinking. But it is also occasionally a wet blanket, especially when the questions being asked are deliciously outrageous. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. The mantra is repeated so often it might as well be carved on a geologist's hammer. And rightly so. If someone claims they found a fossilized toaster oven in Precambrian rock, skepticism should arrive immediately with tea, biscuits, and several lab tests. Science is allergic to leaps without ladders. And the claim that another civilization existed long before us, that is not just a leap. It is an Olympic pole vault into the unknown. But here's the irony. While science resists such claims publicly, it secretly loves them. Scientists are human, after all. They may keep a poker face in a lab, but show them a headline about mystery structures on the ocean floor or unexplained isotopes in ancient rock, and their eyes will sparkle just like ours. They, too, want to believe, but they want to believe responsibly, like parents who know candy is delicious but still insist on vegetables. This tension is what makes the search so fascinating. On one side, skepticism protects us from gullibility. On the other, imagination nudges us to ask questions no one else dares. Without skepticism, we'd be drowning in wild stories of lost continents and time-traveling tourists. Without imagination, we'd never discover plate tectonics, black holes, or the microbial world. The search for earlier civilization sits precisely at this crossroads. Too extraordinary to accept without evidence. Too intriguing to ignore entirely. And let's be honest, science has been wrong before. Once upon a time, the idea that continents drift was mocked. The thought that rocks could record Earth's magnetic reversals sounded absurd. Even fossils of microscopic life were dismissed as smudges until technology proved otherwise. Time and again, anomalies that were shrugged off as nonsense turned out to be revolutions waiting in disguise. Which makes you wonder, are we shrugging off the wrong anomalies today? Still, the burden of proof is brutal. If someone wants to prove there was once a civilization millions of years ago, they would need evidence so undeniable, so unmistakable, that even the grumpiest skeptic would have to nod. A machine part embedded in untouched stone, tested and verified a dozen times. A chemical signature so wildly unnatural that no volcano, no meteor, no trick of geology could mimic it. Without that, the claim collapses. This is why most scientists avoid the question entirely. It's not arrogance, it's true. There are limited hours in the day, limited funding, limited patience for chasing phantoms. Better to study what we know exists. Plate boundaries, fossil transitions, climate records. Safer ground. The question of forgotten civilizations lives in a strange limbo. Too speculative for funding. Too intoxicating to dismiss. It hovers at the edges, a ghost in the lab. And yet, ghosts have a way of inspiring. The very act of considering the possibility sharpens our thinking. It forces us to ask, what evidence do civilizations actually leave behind? How do we distinguish natural anomalies from artificial ones? What would the geological fingerprint of intelligence even look like? These are not idle questions. They are the same questions we use when studying the Anthropocene, our own planetary impact. By asking whether someone came before, we learn more about how we ourselves will be remembered or forgotten. There's a touch of humor in this, too. Imagine a future scientist millions of years from now, sifting through layers of rock. They notice a sudden spike in carbon dioxide, a peculiar scattering of synthetic chemicals, and the faint traces of plastics. They frown, puzzled, and write in their notebook, strange, possibly volcanic, or perhaps an unusual meteor event. And just like that, the entirety of human civilization is reduced to a clerical error. All our music, art, wars, memes, love stories, dismissed as odd weather. The lesson here is sharp but playful. It's not enough to leave a trace. You must leave a trace that cannot be mistaken for anything else. And that is extraordinarily difficult because Earth is so good at impersonations. Want to mimic industry? A volcano can do that. Want to mimic mass extinction? An asteroid can oblige. Want to scatter rare elements across the globe? Hydrothermal vents will be delighted to help. The Earth is basically a cosmic prankster, constantly leaving behind signatures that look suspiciously like civilization, just to keep geologists humble. And so the search continues in whispers, in side conversations at conferences, in quiet papers tucked between more respectable studies. The Silurian Hypothesis is not a claim, it is a mirror. It reflects back our assumptions and asks whether we've underestimated time, overestimated permanence, and misunderstood intelligence itself. It challenges us to notice what we're leaving behind, not our skyscrapers, but our chemistry, not our monuments, but our modifications. Because here's the truth, even without proof of earlier civilizations, the very possibility changes how we see ourselves. If we are the first, then our fingerprints on the planet are unprecedented. If we are not the first, then our fingerprints are part of a pattern. One more brief flourish in Earth's long experiment with intelligence. Either way, the humility remains. We are not eternal. We are not immune to silence. We are participants in a cycle we do not yet fully understand. And perhaps this is the gift of science's skepticism. By demanding extraordinary evidence, it prevents us from leaping into fantasy. But by allowing the question to linger, even cautiously, It keeps us dreaming. Science may say, "Show me proof," but in the quiet hours it also whispers, "Wouldn't it be something if it were true?" So as you rest tonight, consider that delicate balance. Skepticism guarding the gates, imagination sneaking through the windows. Consider how fragile our traces are, how easily even our loudest age might fade into silence. And then consider the possibility, outrageous yet haunting, that we may not be the first to ask these questions. That long ago, under a different sky, another civilization looked at its world, wondered about permanence, and asked the very same thing. What if we are not the first? If future geologists ever dig into the ruins of our time, they won't find our monuments first. They won't marvel at glass towers or satellites, because those will be long gone, rusted, shattered, folded back into the earth. No, the first thing they'll find is chemistry. Our greatest legacy is not the Eiffel Tower, but the invisible traces of our meddling with air, soil, and water. Consider carbon. For millions of years, the Earth's atmosphere followed a steady rhythm, carbon dioxide rising and falling like a gentle breath. Then, suddenly in one geological heartbeat, that rhythm spiked. An unmistakable jolt, sharp and fast, unlike anything seen in millions of years. That spike is us. Our chimneys, our cars, our power plants, all shouting into the sky at once. Even if every building and every book vanished tomorrow, that carbon fingerprint would linger in stone, a line in the diary of the planet that says, "Something strange happened here." Now look at nitrogen. Farming, for all its gifts, rewrites soil. Fertilizers inject chemicals into the ground, altering nutrient cycles. Irrigation shifts water chemistry. Fields reshape erosion. Long after the tractors are gone, the soils will remember. Layered sediments will whisper, "This land was tilled. This earth was tampered with." We may forget our farms. The ground will not. And then there is plastic, our most flamboyant marker. Plastic is the new fossil. Tiny fragments are already being buried in sediments, woven into the very fabric of the earth. They may break down into smaller pieces, but they do not disappear. Imagine millions of years from now, a thin band of colorful flecks fossilized in rock. To whoever finds it, it will look like a bizarre experiment in nature. A rainbow of synthetic crumbs, proof that someone once invented indestructible wrappers for candy bars. If there were an Olympics for geological persistence, plastic would take gold. But the crown jewel of our legacy may be nuclear isotopes. Unlike plastics or carbon, these are not mere exaggerations of natural processes. They are truly alien in the geological record. The isotopes created by nuclear tests are vanishingly rare in nature. They decay slowly, leaving signatures that endure for hundreds of thousands of years. Even if our species is gone, even if every skyscraper collapses, the rocks will carry this unmistakable fingerprint. It is our calling card, a message written in atoms. Humans are here. This is both humbling and absurd. Think of it. Our greatest monuments will not be cathedrals or space stations, but a thin layer of garbage and radiation. We dreamed of eternity in stone, but we will be remembered by bottle caps and isotopes. Imagine future scientists scratching their heads, saying, "This civilization must have worshipped a god of polymers," and they marked their holy sites with radioactive rituals. Not entirely wrong, but not the legacy we choose for ourselves. Still, it is legacy, and it highlights a truth. Civilizations may not endure, but their changes to the planet do. Intelligence leaves scars. It disrupts cycles, alters chemistry, rearranges ecosystems. Those disruptions may fade, but some persist. And those are the fingerprints we look for when we ask if someone came before us. Not buildings, but anomalies. Not monuments, but misbehavior. There's irony here, of course. We imagine ourselves as eternal builders, but our most durable creations are not the ones we celebrate. No poet sings of fertilizer. No tourist poses with plastic waste. No hymn praises isotopes. Yet these are what will endure. When our songs are gone and our monuments are mulch, the earth is a ruthless editor. It deletes the lines we think matter and keeps the footnotes we would rather forget. And so we must ask, if earlier civilizations existed, what scars did they leave? Did they too shift the balance of carbon, scatter metals, or alter soil? Did they, like us, tinker with nature until the record of their presence was written in anomalies? If so, we may already have found their fingerprints without realizing it. A carbon spike here, a chemical oddity there, filed under natural event, because we lacked the imagination to see otherwise. The possibility is dizzying. Our Anthropocene, this new epoch we are carving, is not just about us. It may be a case study in how intelligence leaves marks, marks that last longer than memory. By studying our own impact, we learn how to look for others. By tracing our own scars, we learn where to search for theirs. Humor sneaks in here, because the contrast is almost comic. The Parthenon will crumble, the Great Wall will fall, the internet will fade, but somewhere in the rock record, there will be a stubborn layer of plastic forks. 1,000,000 years from now, some paleontologist may hold one up and wonder if it was a ceremonial artifact, perhaps a tool of great symbolic power. Ah, yes, they'll say, the fork people. Clearly a civilization obsessed with pronged sticks. And they will write papers, give lectures, argue fiercely, all while missing the simple truth that it was just cutlery. But perhaps that is the destiny of civilizations, to be misunderstood by the future, to leave behind evidence that is ambiguous, puzzling, open to misinterpretation. Maybe earlier civilizations left us anomalies we've already noticed but not recognized. Maybe we're walking through their legacy without knowing it, misreading their story as nature's. And maybe ours will suffer the same fate. Our proudest achievements filed under odd blip by future geologists who never know our names. And yet, there is something oddly comforting about this. To know that even if we vanish, even if memory fails, something of us will remain, not in statues or cathedrals, but in the chemistry of the earth. A thin layer, a quiet anomaly, a whisper in stone. It may not be much, but it is something. So tonight, as you lie there drifting, think about the strange legacy we're leaving. Not the monuments, but the invisible fingerprints. Not the triumphs we boast about, but the side effects we ignore. Think of the carbon spike, the nitrogen scars, the plastic crumbs, the radioactive glow. These are our monuments, whether we like it or not. And they may be the only part of us that survives long enough to be noticed. And perhaps in some distant age, another civilization will study these traces and wonder, who were these people? What did they dream? What did they fear? And were they the first, or just one more chapter in a story the earth refuses to tell in full? If humanity vanished tomorrow, what would the earth do with our cities? Would they stand as eternal monuments to our cleverness? Or would they dissolve quietly back into the soil? The answer is already written in the language of rust and root, in the way weeds split concrete, in the way ivy climbs the walls of abandoned buildings. The earth, patient as ever, would begin its reclamation almost immediately. Within days, pumps that keep subways dry would fail. Water would pour in flooding tunnels until they became underground rivers. Rats would thrive, fish would return, and your morning commute would suddenly look like a theme park ride. Within weeks, weeds would sprout through cracks in sidewalks, splitting asphalt into jagged puzzle pieces. Glass would begin to crack and tumble. Streetlights, once proud and orderly, would bend and fall, surrendering to wind and rust. Within a few decades, forests would march back into suburbs. Roots would pry apart basements. Birds would nest in skyscrapers, treating office towers like convenient cliffs. Without maintenance, steel would weaken. Concrete would crumble. Bridges would sag. The proud skyline of a great city would collapse not with a bang, but with a quiet sigh. By the end of the century, most buildings would be ruins softened by vines and moss. By the end of a millennium, almost all would be gone, smoothed into hills, folded into soil, reclaimed without ceremony. We like to imagine our cities as permanent, but permanence is a lie whispered by architecture. New York, Paris, Shanghai, all of them are temporary guests, tolerated briefly by a planet that has other plans. Even the materials we think of as durable betray us quickly. Concrete, that stalwart symbol of modernity, begins to crumble within centuries when exposed to weather. Steel corrodes relentlessly, turning towers into skeletons that eventually collapse. Glass, sharp and gleaming today, fractures and scatters until it is indistinguishable from sand. Nature, meanwhile, is relentless. Coyotes have already moved into Chicago. Foxes prowl London. In abandoned neighborhoods, deer stroll casually past collapsing porches. Raccoons raid attics. Trees burst through living room floors. Give a few centuries without us, and the line between city and forest would blur into invisibility. To future explorers, our suburbs might look like nothing more than oddly symmetrical woods, where the occasional lump of concrete hides beneath moss. And yet, some traces would persist. Not monuments, but residues. The chemistry of our age would linger in soils, sediments, and rocks. Carbon spikes, nitrogen scars, isotopic fingerprints. Plastics woven into the ground like confetti no one bothered to sweep. These are the quiet ghosts of our civilization, stubborn enough to survive long after our towers have collapsed. The irony is sharp. We dreamed of eternity in marble and steel, but eternity belongs to chemistry. A plastic bottle cap will outlast the Empire State Building. A thin film of isotopes from a single nuclear test may endure longer than all of our literature. Our stories may fade, but our waste will speak for us. It is not the legacy we intended, but it is the one we are leaving. And perhaps this is why the idea of forgotten civilizations haunts us. We look at our own fragility and realize how easily we could vanish. We see how quickly nature would erase us, and we wonder, has it already erased others? Did past civilizations build their own cities of stone and metal, only to watch them collapse into dust? Did they, too, leave behind only residues, anomalies mistaken for natural events? Humor sneaks in here, because the thought is both sobering and absurd. Imagine deer wandering through the ruins of Times Square, browsing where billboards once screamed advertisements. Imagine squirrels nesting in the Statue of Liberty, raccoons treating it like a luxury apartment. Imagine cockroaches inheriting Las Vegas, scuttling across casino floors now carpeted in moss. Civilization's end may not be dramatic. It may simply be untidy. A gradual fade into wilderness until only the animals remember where we once stood. And yet, even in that erasure, something endures. The earth cannot help but keep a few notes. Soil remembers agriculture. Sediment remembers pollution. Rock remembers isotopes. These are the echoes of us, faint but undeniable. They may not say who we were, but they will say that we were, and in deep time, that may be all that matters. If another civilization existed long ago, they too may have been erased in just this way. Their cities devoured, their monuments leveled, their tools scattered and weathered into anonymity. All that remains might be subtle scars in chemistry, faint anomalies in stone, and we, mistaking them for natural noise, may have already dismissed them. Their entire existence filed away in a textbook as volcanic activity or an unusual climate fluctuation. It is humbling to think that this could be our fate too, that millions of years from now, our skyscrapers will not matter, our satellites will not matter, even our archives will not matter. What will matter is the quiet layer we leave behind, the chemical whisper in rock, the story of humanity, reduced to a spike in carbon and a rainbow of fossilized plastic. To us, that feels like tragedy. To the Earth, it is simply Tuesday. So as you drift toward sleep, imagine the cities you know dissolving under the patient hands of nature. Imagine vines swallowing towers, rivers reclaiming highways, forests rising where suburbs once sprawled. Imagine a future geologist holding a plastic shard and wondering what kind of world produced it. And imagine that this is not just our future, but perhaps the past of others too. Civilizations erased, their cities reclaimed, their stories reduced to whispers. And perhaps in the end, this is the lesson. The Earth is not sentimental. It will not keep our monuments out of kindness. It will erase them because erasure is what it does. And all we can hope is that somewhere in chemistry and memory, a trace will remain. Time, as we usually imagine it, is gentle. We picture it as a river flowing forward, carrying us along. But deep time, geological time, is nothing like a river. It is a grinding machine, a cosmic blender, a slow but merciless eraser. Civilizations, in its view, are not milestones but scribbles, wiped away before the ink dries. Take plate tectonics, Earth's greatest recycling system. The surface we live on is not fixed. It is a restless mosaic of slabs sliding, colliding, diving beneath one another. Oceanic crust, especially, is doomed. It is born at mid-ocean ridges, spreads outward, and is eventually dragged back into the mantle to be melted and remade. In about 200 million years, nearly all of today's ocean floor will be gone, swallowed whole. If a city were built there, its ruins would not just be buried, they would be incinerated, folded back into magma, erased so thoroughly it would be as if it never existed. Even continents, those supposedly stable giants, are not immune. Mountains rise and crumble. Rocks are buried, baked, and metamorphosed. Sediments are compacted, folded, and transformed. Given enough time, even the oldest crust is churned and rewritten. The Earth is not an archive. It is a palimpsest, a manuscript written and rewritten until the original words are invisible. Civilizations that existed long ago would be lucky to leave even a smudge. And then there is erosion, the slow sculptor. Rain falls, rivers carve, winds strip, glaciers scrape. Cliffs retreat grain by grain. Deserts march forward, valleys deepen. To us, these changes feel glacial. To deep time, they are fast and ruthless. Cities, monuments, and roads, all are ground down, washed away, scattered as dust. A skyscraper may look eternal to an architect, but to a mountain it is nothing more than an oddly shaped pebble waiting to be sand again. Even fossils, those precious exceptions, remind us how rare preservation truly is. For a creature to fossilize, it must die in just the right place, be buried quickly, protected from scavengers, preserved in sediments that escape destruction for millions of years. It is a miracle when it happens, not the rule. Most life vanishes without a trace. If even bones and shells dissolve into silence, what chance does a civilization of wood, metal, and data have? Humor sneaks in here, because the truth is almost absurd. Imagine a city, skyscrapers, highways, airports, slowly crumbling. 1,000,000 years later, it is dust. 200 million years later, the dust itself has been dragged into the mantle, melted, and exhaled again through a volcano. The skyscraper is reborn not as ruins, but as lava. Civilization transformed into scenery. The Eiffel Tower returns as part of a mountain. Las Vegas becomes magma. This is not metaphor. This is the ordinary rhythm of Earth. Our proudest works are destined to be recycled like old soda cans. This is why the geological record is patchy, why the silence is so loud. The planet is not keeping secrets deliberately. It is simply busy. It is restless, rewriting itself constantly. We may wish for permanence, but the Earth has no interest in keeping our diaries. It prefers to reuse the paper. And so the question sharpens. If another civilization rose millions of years ago, how much of it would survive? The honest answer is almost nothing, unless they left behind traces durable enough to resist tectonics and erosion. Their existence would be erased completely. Their monuments, their tools, their archives, all swallowed, scattered, or transformed beyond recognition. What might endure would not be architecture, but anomalies, chemical oddities, isotopic fingerprints, subtle scars in the cycles of the planet. And even those would risk being smeared, overwritten, or dismissed. Consider this. The oldest oceanic crust on Earth is about 200 million years old. The Earth itself is over 4.5 billion. That means we've lost over 95% of the planet's surface history. It's gone, recycled, forgotten. If civilizations lived on those vanished surfaces, their stories went down with them, erased in molten rock. Deep time is not just an eraser. It is a shredder, a furnace, a relentless janitor tidying up after every age. And yet, this erasure is oddly beautiful. It means the Earth is alive, dynamic, ever-changing. The same processes that doom civilizations also create the landscapes we adore. Mountains, valleys, coastlines, fertile soils. The eraser is also the artist. Without tectonics and erosion, the planet would be a dead, unchanging rock. We owe our very existence to the same forces that guarantee our impermanence. Perhaps that is why the thought of forgotten civilizations resonates so strongly. We see how fragile we are in the face of deep time, and we realize if others came before, they too were erased. They too were folded into stone, scattered into sand, swallowed by oceans. Their memory is not absent because they were unworthy, but because the Earth does not archive, it composts. Civilizations are not stored. They are mulched, turned into soil for whatever comes next. And maybe that is the lesson worth carrying into sleep. Permanence is a fantasy, but participation is real. We are not immortal, but we are part of the endless cycle. Builders, dreamers, storytellers who will one day be erased and remade into something else. Perhaps another species will rise millions of years from now, and they will wonder about us the way we wonder about others. Perhaps they will find our chemical scars, our plastic confetti, our radioactive signature, and they will whisper, "Something unusual happened here once." So tonight, imagine the deep machinery of time grinding patiently beneath your bed. Imagine continents drifting, mountains crumbling, oceans swallowing coastlines. Imagine entire civilizations folded into stone, erased, and remade. Imagine us, too, joining that cycle. Our towers and bridges and data streams return to magma, and in that vision, find comfort. Because if we are erased, we are also renewed. If we are forgotten, we are also reborn. In deep time, everything is temporary, but nothing is truly lost. If deep time erases almost everything, then the question becomes, what, if anything, can slip through its fingers? What can endure the grinding of tectonics, the washing of rain, the scouring of glaciers, the chewing patience of erosion? If civilizations rose and fell before us, what faint fingerprints might still remain? The answer is not monuments, not temples, not skyscrapers. Those are too fragile, too eager to collapse. The answer is residue. Civilizations change the planet, whether they intend to or not. They alter chemistry, shuffle ecosystems, scatter anomalies into stone. And while buildings fade, residues linger. They are the whispers left behind after the voices are gone. Start with carbon spikes. The Earth has a steady rhythm of carbon dioxide, a slow breathing pattern across millions of years. But civilizations, with their hunger for energy, break that rhythm. They dig up ancient carbon, coal, oil, gas, and release it all at once. To the geological record, this looks like a sudden unnatural jolt, a deviation too sharp to be explained by slow cycles. We are already leaving such a spike. If someone did it before, their spike may still be hiding in the rock, mistaken for a volcanic tantrum. Then there are isotopic fingerprints. Nuclear energy and weapons scatter isotopes that are rare in nature, sometimes almost non-existent outside of laboratories. These isotopes are stubborn, slow to decay, lasting hundreds of thousands of years. If an earlier civilization ever split the atom, the echoes of that act might still hum faintly in sediments. They would be subtle, hard to distinguish from background noise, but they would be there, atomic graffiti scrawled across the rock record. Consider also plastics or their equivalents. We think of plastic as uniquely human. But what if another civilization invented something similar? Durable synthetic, resistant to decay? Our plastics are already fossilizing, embedding themselves in sediments. In millions of years, they may appear as colorful streaks in stone. If another species once littered its world with durable polymers, we might find faint traces of them, misidentified as odd mineral deposits. What we call plastic pollution might one day be seen as the clearest evidence that humans ever lived. And then there are metals. Civilizations concentrate metals in ways nature rarely does. Mines carve out deposits, smelters scatter residues. Industry distributes elements far from their sources. Over time, these metals weather, corrode, and spread, creating unusual concentrations in soils and sediments. To a careful geologist, such anomalies look suspicious. Why so much copper here? Why rare earth elements in such abundance? Nature does odd things, yes, but not usually in quite the same patterns as civilization. These chemical scars may persist long after the artifacts themselves are dust. But perhaps the most haunting residue is ecological disruption. Civilizations rearrange life. They clear forests, plant monocultures, domesticate animals, drive species to extinction. These shifts echo in biodiversity records. Fossil layers suddenly lose variety. Species disappear, new patterns emerge. To future scientists, our current wave of extinctions will look like a cliff, a sudden collapse of life, followed by a strange reshuffling. If others came before, perhaps their ecological disruptions are still faintly visible, disguised as natural die-offs. Perhaps one of the mass extinctions we attribute to volcanoes or asteroids was in fact the collateral damage of civilization. It's an unsettling possibility that the fossil record of extinction is also the fossil record of intelligence. Humor sneaks in here, because when you imagine future geologists puzzling over our residues, the misinterpretations are almost comical. They may find our plastics and conclude we worshipped colorful stones. They may find our isotopes and imagine ritual explosions, ceremonies of fire. They may find our concentrated metals and assume we were obsessive collectors of shiny rocks. In their lectures, they will argue fiercely about what the fork people or the plastic worshippers really believed, missing the simple truth that we just liked convenience and cutlery. But misinterpretation is inevitable because residues are ambiguous. A carbon spike could mean industry or volcanism. A biodiversity collapse could mean agriculture or climate change. An isotope anomaly could mean nuclear tests or some rare natural process we don't yet understand. Nature mimics civilization so well that even the best evidence risks being shrugged off as geology's mischief, which means that if earlier civilizations left traces, we may already have dismissed them, tucked them into textbooks as oddities with natural explanations. And that is perhaps the most unsettling thought, that the evidence is already in our hands, already cataloged, already labeled, but misinterpreted. A forgotten civilization may exist today not in ruins, but in data tables, filed away as strange but explainable. The whisper is there, but we are not listening. Yet even this silence has meaning. It reminds us that civilizations are temporary, but disruptions are stubborn. We cannot vanish without leaving some trace, even if that trace is ambiguous. Our monuments will fade, but our anomalies will persist. And someday, perhaps, another civilization will puzzle over them as we puzzle over oddities today. So tonight, as you drift into quiet, imagine those residues. A spike in carbon, a scattering of plastics, an unusual isotopic glow. Imagine them as the whispers of our time, carried forward long after we are gone. And then imagine the possibility that we are not the first to leave such whispers, that buried in stone, hidden in chemistry, there may be other whispers, faint, overlapping, waiting for someone to ask the right question. Because, in the end, civilizations are not remembered by their monuments. They are remembered, if at all, by their scars. Stone forgets, but stories linger. They may warp, stretch, and twist, but they survive in ways that steel and marble do not. Civilizations that crumble into dust may still leave faint shadows in the tales their descendants tell, or even in tales passed further across vast gulfs of time, like drifting seeds no one remembers planting. The flood is the clearest example. Nearly every culture tells one. In Mesopotamia, the gods send waters to wash away an old world. In Greece, Zeus orders a deluge that spares only a few. In Hindu myth, Manu survives a cosmic flood with the help of a fish. In Norse sagas, Ymir's blood drowns the earth. In the Bible, Noah builds his ark. The details vary, but the chorus is the same. Waters rise, worlds end, a remnant survives. Why does this story echo across continents? Some say it's simple. Floods are common and humans, being squishy, are traumatized by them. A village swept away becomes a story retold, magnified, passed down until it grows into myth. This is true enough, yet the sheer persistence of the theme, its stubborn appearance across cultures with no contact, makes you wonder if something deeper lies beneath. Could it be memory, faint and distorted, of a greater catastrophe? Could our myths be the last fragile fossils of forgotten civilizations? Imagine an earlier people watching their coastlines drown as glaciers melted. Imagine them telling their children, "The waters came, the land was swallowed." Imagine those children passing it on until generations later. The story grows into a cosmic flood that remade the world. The details are blurred, but the shape remains. Myth is not precise. It is tenacious. Of course, science cannot treat myths as data. No one can submit the Epic of Gilgamesh as a peer-reviewed reference. But perhaps we should treat myth as a clue, not evidence, but resonance. A whisper that says, something happened. It mattered. Remember. Myths preserve emotions when facts fail. Metaphors when measurements are impossible. They are the memory foam of culture, compressing under time, but never fully returning to blankness. Humor sneaks in here, because humans rarely tell simple stories. If floods are just floods, we could have stopped at it rained a lot. Instead, we add boats the size of stadiums, gods debating policy, animals marching 2 by 2 like well-trained tourists. This is how memory survives. Dressed up in costumes, exaggerated until it entertains enough to be told again. Accuracy is sacrificed on the altar of interest. After all, who would pass down a bedtime story that begins, "One year the river flooded a little more than usual, and people had to move to higher ground"? No child would stay awake for that. But add a god, an ark, and a rainbow, and you've got cultural immortality, which makes myths both unreliable and indispensable. They are not maps, but they may be weather vanes. They point to experiences so intense they demanded retelling. Perhaps floods, perhaps fire, perhaps collapse itself. Civilizations faced with erasure may encode their trauma in story, hoping that even a stone fails, words will wander forward. And maybe we are inheriting not only our own memories, but echoes from deeper pasts. Take the theme of lost worlds, Atlantis in Plato's dialogues, sunken lands in Celtic legend, vanished kingdoms in Hindu epics. These stories may be metaphors, allegories, or inventions. But what if they are faint memories of drowned coastlines, of civilizations erased by sea level rise, by earthquakes, by fire? What if myth is not invention, but inheritance, passed unknowingly from a people long gone? We cannot know. That is the agony of myth. It preserves presence, but erases detail. It whispers something happened, but it never tells us exactly what. It hands us a smudged photograph and says, "Figure out." And we, pattern seekers that we are, lean in eagerly, trying to decode what may be nothing more than metaphor, or maybe the faint echo of truth. Perhaps this is why the question of earlier civilizations stirs us so deeply. We see how fragile we are, how easily floods, fire, or famine could erase us, and we realize if it happened before, their stories would be all that remained. And those stories would reach us not as data, but as myth tangled in gods and monsters, retold until only the bones of memory remained. Humor again helps us bear the weight. Imagine if future civilizations misinterpreted our stories. They stumble upon a scrap of Harry Potter and assume we worshipped a lightning-scarred boy. They find a copy of Star Wars and conclude our history was shaped by laser swords and an empire in space. They discover our superhero films and think we truly believed in caped gods battling villains on rooftops. Would they be wrong? Perhaps not entirely. Those stories do tell truths about us, just not in the way archaeologists would expect. So, too, perhaps, with ancient myths. They may not tell us what literally happened, but they reveal something about what mattered. So tonight, as you drift between waking and dreaming, picture the myths as fossils of memory. floods washing the world, land sinking beneath waves, God scolding humanity for arrogance. These may be allegories, yes, but they may also be faint echoes of civilizations erased. We cannot tell, but we can listen. And in listening, we become part of the chain that keeps the memory alive, however distorted. Because in the end, civilizations may vanish, but their stories do not always die. They mutate, they travel, they survive. And perhaps when stone forgets, story is the only thing left that can say, once we were here. We tend to think knowledge is immortal. Once written down, once stored, once digitized, surely it will last forever. But this, too, is an illusion. Our libraries, archives, and cloud servers feel indestructible only because we live inside their short-lived present. To deep time, they are fragile sandcastles, waiting for the tide. Consider books. Paper feels sturdy enough in the hand, but in the long run, it crumbles. A few centuries without careful preservation, and pages yellow, tear, dissolve into dust. Even stone tablets, which we imagine as eternal, erode until inscriptions vanish. Knowledge carved into walls is still knowledge exposed to rain, frost, and wind. Civilizations that rely on writing must accept that their words are written in water. Now, look at digital storage. Hard drives fail within decades. Optical discs degrade. Solid-state memory leaks charge until it forgets what it was supposed to remember. Even the cloud is nothing mystical. It is just computers in warehouses, machines that rust, overheat, lose power. Without constant care, without human hands to maintain them, our vast digital archives will vanish almost instantly in geological terms. Entire centuries of knowledge, compressed into fragile machines, could disappear in the span of a single lifetime. This fragility is almost comic. Humanity has poured its wisdom, art, humor, and folly into formats that are less durable than clay pots. We imagine the internet as eternal, but it is more ephemeral than parchment. A simple blackout, a failure of servers, and our collective memory could evaporate like mist. If aliens landed 1,000,000 years from now and searched for our wisdom, they would not find it in USB drives or DVDs. They would find it, at best, in faint chemical scars. Our information age would look like an age of silence. And so the thought emerges. Perhaps other civilizations made the same mistake. Perhaps they, too, poured their knowledge into fragile media, organic materials, memory-based traditions, perishable devices. Perhaps they, too, believed knowledge was permanent, only to watch it dissolve when their time ended. Their wisdom may have rivaled ours or surpassed it. Their science may have been exquisite, their art sublime. And yet, all of it could vanish if their storage was as fragile as ours. Even stone tools are deceptive. They last, yes, but they tell us almost nothing of what their makers knew. A chipped flint reveals technique, but not language. A grinding stone shows diet, but not philosophy. Imagine trying to reconstruct Shakespeare from a spoon. That is the challenge archaeology faces. If earlier civilizations left behind only tools, we might underestimate them entirely. We might imagine they were primitive when in truth they were philosophers, astronomers, healers. But their knowledge, stored in fragile media, left no trace. This is the danger of conflating artifacts with intelligence. Not every civilization expresses itself in the same way. Some may prioritize material monuments. Others may prefer ephemeral records. Some may carve in stone. Others may encode in memory, ritual, or even in biology itself. And if their chosen medium does not endure, their intelligence dissolves into silence. They may have known wonders, but we will never know them. Humor finds its way in here because the image is irresistible. Imagine a future archaeologist discovering a fossilized USB stick. They test it, only to find the data is long gone. They publish a paper declaring this was likely a ceremonial object, perhaps an amulet. Meanwhile, the stick once held cat videos and tax documents. Or imagine them unearthing a smartphone, its circuits mineralized, its screen shattered. They declare it a ritual tablet, decorated with meaningless icons. They will never know it once carried the sum of human chatter, compressed into pixels. This fragility is humbling. We like to imagine that knowledge accumulates endlessly, that it builds upon itself without loss. But history tells another story. The Library of Alexandria burned. Countless manuscripts crumbled. Languages died. Traditions were silenced. Entire systems of thought vanished without leaving a single trace. Human history is littered with forgotten wisdom. If forgetting is this easy within a few thousand years, what happens over millions? The silence becomes almost inevitable. And yet, perhaps knowledge does not die completely. Perhaps it mutates. Some ideas linger in myth, in symbols, in patterns that outlast words. A star chart may vanish, but stories of constellations remain. A medical treatise may burn, but herbs are still passed down in folk remedies. Fragments survive, distorted, disguised, misremembered. Knowledge is mortal, but its shadow may persist, like a ghost haunting cultures long after its origin is gone. So if there were civilizations before us, maybe their wisdom still lingers, not in books or machines, but in whispers, in myths of floods, in tales of lost ages, in symbols carved into patterns we half recognize. We may be carrying their fragments without knowing it, retelling their stories under different names, mistaking their knowledge for our own invention. And if so, then perhaps no civilization is ever entirely forgotten. But here lies the sharpest irony. We spend so much time worrying about what future generations will think of us, how our knowledge will endure, how our names will be remembered. Yet the truth is, the earth may care little. Our archives may vanish. Our monuments may crumble. Our wisdom may be erased. What survives will be accidental, arbitrary, misinterpreted. The sum of human thought may be compressed into a single plastic shard or a faint isotopic anomaly. To deep time, our knowledge is not sacred. It is compost. So tonight, as your eyes close and your thoughts wander, imagine our libraries dissolving into dust, our servers going silent, our books scattering into ashes. Imagine civilizations before us, whose wisdom may once have lit their skies, now reduced to whispers in myth or anomalies in stone. And imagine the possibility that this is the fate of all intelligence, to rise, to flourish, to dream, and then to vanish, leaving only the faintest shadow behind. And perhaps that is not tragedy but truth. Knowledge is not immortal, but the act of seeking it is. Civilizations may forget, but curiosity endures. Each rise, each fall, each fleeting moment of wisdom is part of the endless rhythm. And perhaps in the silence of deep time, that rhythm is the only story that truly lasts. When we picture civilization, we imagine a mirror of ourselves. Cities of stone, towers of steel, roads, machines, lights, networks. We assume that intelligence inevitably builds monuments. But what if that assumption blinds us? What if earlier civilizations looked nothing like ours? So different that we wouldn't even recognize their traces if we found them. Imagine a civilization that never embraced metal. For us, metallurgy is foundational. Bronze, iron, steel, each age defined by its alloys. But what if another intelligent species never needed it? Perhaps they had no obsession with tools, or perhaps their environment provided materials that were stronger, lighter, or easier to renew. If their technology relied on organics, would bone plant fibers, biopolymers, their artifacts would dissolve almost instantly on geological scales. 1,000,000 years later, the ground would hold nothing but silence. Or picture a society that built not up, but within. Instead of skyscrapers, they lived in burrows, caves, or woven forests. Instead of sprawling industry, they cultivated ecosystems to serve as their infrastructure. Forests as farms, rivers as highways. Their engineering may have been biological, not mechanical. Instead of factories belching smoke, imagine vast gardens tuned to respond to their needs, animals bred to act as tools, landscapes shaped by subtle intervention. To us, this would look indistinguishable from nature. We'd never know the difference between a forest designed by intelligence and one grown by accident. Then there's the possibility of knowledge without artifacts. What if they mastered oral traditions so perfectly that they had no need for writing? What if their science was encoded in ritual, song, or memory, passed flawlessly across generations? We see this as fragile, but perhaps they saw it as freedom, a way to avoid cluttering their world with debris. If so, their knowledge could vanish the moment their voices went silent. They could have charted the stars, cured disease, explored philosophy, and left not a single trace. Their genius would dissolve as easily as breath. Humor sneaks in here, because the contrast is absurd. Imagine archaeologists discovering nothing but stones and shells from such people, shrugging and saying, "Primitive." Meanwhile, these primitives may have debated cosmology more elegantly than we ever have. They may have understood quantum fields while we were still fumbling with steam engines. But because they didn't leave skyscrapers or smartphones, we'd write them off as cavemen. Archaeology is biased toward clutter. A minimalist civilization, however advanced, would be invisible. Even tools themselves are ambiguous. A chipped stone may be a knife or just an accident. A worn pebble may be a grinder or just a rock tumbled in a river. Without clear context, without unmistakable design, we hesitate to call them artifacts, which means that if an earlier civilization favored simple, subtle tools, we may already be walking past them, dismissing them as natural. The earth does not label its shelves. A forgotten knife may spend eternity disguised as geology. There's also the question of scale. We assume intelligence must expand, spread, dominate. But what if a civilization chose not to? What if they were small, local, content to thrive in balance with their environment? They may have never altered the atmosphere, never left global chemical scars. Their impact may have been profound in their time, but undetectable in ours. A civilization that lived lightly would vanish completely, leaving no anomalies for us to puzzle over. To us, they would look like silence, but to them, it may have been wisdom. And perhaps this is the most unsettling thought of all, that intelligence does not always mean skyscrapers, satellites, or plastic straws. Intelligence may bloom in forms that are invisible to archaeology. It may prefer harmony to conquest, subtlety to spectacle. We equate civilization with noise. But what if true intelligence chooses quiet? What if the mark of wisdom is not disruption, but its absence? If so, our search is hopelessly biased. We dig for artifacts, but artifacts may not exist. We scan for anomalies, but anomalies may not appear. A civilization that valued ephemerality could have risen and fallen a dozen times on Earth, leaving nothing behind but myths we no longer recognize. They may have stood beneath the same stars, asked the same questions, dreamed the same dreams, and vanished without even a scar. And yet, invisibility is not the same as non-existence. Just because we cannot see them does not mean they were not here. It only means that their story was written in ink too fragile for stone. They may be gone, but that doesn't erase the possibility of their presence. The silence may not be emptiness. It may be subtlety. Humor softens the weight of this. Imagine an alien archaeologist arriving millions of years from now. They search for our legacy, expecting monuments. Instead, they find nothing but chemical scars and plastic shards. They conclude we were primitive. They write in their reports, this species had no cities, no machines, no culture worth noting, possibly intelligent squirrels. Meanwhile, we like to think of ourselves as the pinnacle of progress. The joke is on us. Invisibility works both ways. So tonight, as you drift, imagine civilizations that do not resemble ours at all. Imagine thinkers who built no towers, makers who left no debris, storytellers who carved no tablets. Imagine them as whispers in the fabric of time, present but unseen. And imagine that their wisdom, though erased, may still ripple in ways we cannot measure, in myths and patterns and echoes carried unknowingly into our own minds. Because, in the end, the absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. It is only evidence of invisibility. And if intelligence often chooses invisibility, then perhaps Earth has hosted more civilizations than we will ever dare to imagine. Absence is a strange kind of presence. It is the outline of a thing we cannot see, the shadow of something not there. When we sift through the Earth's deep history, absence is everywhere. Missing fossils, broken timelines, blank layers where we expected stories. It is tempting to think of these as voids, but perhaps they are whispers. Perhaps the silence itself is trying to tell us something. Geologists know this intimately. They call them unconformities, gaps in the rock record where layers have been erased, either by erosion or by the restless movements of the crust. Imagine a book with chapters ripped out, sentences half erased, paragraphs scribbled over. That is the Earth's diary. What remains may be beautiful, but what is missing is vast. Somewhere in those absences, entire civilizations could hide, and we would never know. The irony is sharp. We search for artifacts and anomalies, but the loudest clue of all may be the silence itself. If intelligence rose before us, and if the Earth erased it, then the absence is exactly what we should expect to find. Civilization is a guest, geology is a landlord, and the landlord has a strict policy of wiping the slate clean. To complain that we see no evidence may be missing the point. The absence is the evidence. It shows how fragile we are, how easily memory dissolves. Even within human history, the silence is deafening. We know so little of our own beginnings. Whole cultures have vanished, leaving behind nothing but pottery shards or undeciphered symbols. Entire languages have died, carrying their wisdom into silence. If forgetting is this easy across a few thousand years, what chance does knowledge have across millions? The gaps in the record are not surprising. They are inevitable. Humor softens the weight of this realization. Imagine standing before a rock face that represents hundreds of millions of years. The geologist points to a smooth line and says, everything that happened here for 70 million years is missing. You nod, impressed, while secretly wondering if that missing chunk was the era of the world's greatest theme parks, complete with roller coasters run by trilobites. It's unlikely, yes, but the gap refuses to say otherwise. Silence is maddening precisely because it refuses to confess. And yet, silence is not emptiness. It is full of possibility. The absence of fossils may mean nothing lived there, or it may mean everything that lived there was erased. The absence of tools may mean no one invented them, or that tools were made of things too fragile to last. The absence of anomalies may mean no civilization rose, or that their traces were disguised as natural. Silence does not close doors, it opens them. There is a subtle beauty in this. The earth does not give us certainty, it gives us mystery. Every gap is an invitation to wonder. Perhaps the missing years were filled with nothing but forests and oceans. Or perhaps for a brief time intelligence bloomed, asked questions, built wonders, and then vanished, leaving only absence. We cannot know, and that not knowing is itself part of the story. In a way, absence is more haunting than presence. A fossil is comforting. It says, here's proof. An artifact is thrilling. It says, here's connection. But silence says nothing. It leaves us with possibilities we cannot resolve. Did civilizations rise before us? Did they vanish without a trace? The silence neither confirms nor denies. It only waits like a locked door without a key. And perhaps this is the truest lesson of all. If we vanish, the earth will not preserve us neatly. Our cities will crumble. Our data will fade. Our monuments will dissolve. What will remain is a thin layer of anomalies and vast silence. Future minds may puzzle over the traces, but mostly they will encounter absence. They will wonder if we existed, just as we wonder about those before us. And the silence will refuse to answer. Humor returns, because otherwise the weight is too much. Imagine future geologists arguing over a gap in the record. This unconformity clearly indicates erosion, one insists. Another frowns. Or perhaps it was the age of the squirrel kings, who erased their traces out of spite. The first rolls their eyes. The second smiles. Both are wrong, but both are comforted by the stories they tell. Silence, after all, demands stories. We cannot leave gaps alone. We fill them with imagination. And maybe that is the point. Absence may be the earth's most honest testimony. I erase. What we do with that truth is up to us. We can despair at the thought that nothing lasts, or we can marvel that anything lasts at all. We can see silence as a void, or we can see it as a stage where imagination performs. Either way, absence is not meaningless. It is a shape left behind when time moves on. So tonight, as you drift into the quiet, imagine those vast silences in the Earth story. Imagine the missing chapters, the erased pages, the blank lines. Imagine what might have been written there: forests, oceans, creatures, or perhaps minds like ours. Imagine that the silence is not empty, but full of possibilities. And then accept that we may never know. That not knowing is the gift and the curse of deep time. Because in the end, the silence itself is evidence, not of certainty, but of fragility, not of absence, but of impermanence. And that is perhaps the most haunting clue of all. The earth is not a graveyard. It is not even an archive. It is a recycler endlessly folding, crushing, melting, and remaking. Nothing is truly preserved forever. Everything is borrowed. Civilizations, with all their pride and noise, are no exception. In the long rhythm of geology, We are not permanent builders. We are compost. Think of mountains. They rise with glory, proud spines of stone stabbing into the sky. To us, they feel eternal. And yet, even the tallest peaks crumble grain by grain. Everest is not a monument. It is a work in progress, slowly wearing down even as tectonics lift it higher. The same forces that raised mountains erase them. And, in time, the same will happen to us. Our towers may glitter now, but they too will be ground down, spread as dust across plains, washed into oceans, folded into sediments. Or consider the ocean floor. It is born in fire at mid-ocean ridges, spreads outward, collects sediments, and eventually dives back into the mantle at subduction zones. Nothing there is older than about 200 million years, a blink compared to Earth's age. Any ruins built on that surface, no matter how magnificent, would already be gone, swallowed into magma, erased without trace. Civilization, if it ever walked the seafloor, has already been cooked and recycled into lava flows. The planet does not pause to admire. Even fossils, those rare miracles, are products of recycling. A creature must die in the right place, be buried quickly, escape scavengers, survive pressure, and endure long enough to be discovered. Most life fails this lottery. Civilizations fare no better. Their ruins, tools, and art are far less likely to fossilize than bones or shells. The odds of us leaving a clear record across millions of years are vanishingly small. We will not be a chapter preserved. We will be a sentence smudged and rewritten. This recycling is ruthless, but it is also creative. The dust of one age becomes the clay of the next. The ruins of one world become the soil of another. Civilizations, in this sense, do not vanish. They transform. Rome's marble has been repurposed into cathedrals. Bronze has been melted into new weapons. Even our skyscrapers, when they fall, will become rubble. Then sand, then sediment, then stone. One day, perhaps, a future civilization will build its monuments out of the recycled dust of ours. The earth is not sentimental, but it is efficient. Humor sneaks in here, because the image is absurd yet true. Imagine a future mountain composed partly of pulverized smartphones, compressed into sparkling layers. Hikers chip at the rock, marveling at the shiny flecks, not realizing they're looking at the ghosts of old text messages. Or imagine a volcano belching lava that once contained fragments of our monuments. Out of the melted bones of our civilization, new landscapes rise. The planet is a master of recycling, though its methods are more violent than polite. And so the question arises, if earlier civilizations lived before us, where did they go? The answer may be simple: into the cycle. Their stones became sand. Their bones became soil. Their tools became, or once again, they were erased not maliciously, but automatically, as part of the Earth's relentless routine. They may not be lost. They may simply be redistributed, scattered into the very landscapes we walk upon. This thought changes perspective. We often imagine ourselves as separate from nature, carving our mark upon it. But in truth, we are temporary guests, destined to be folded back into the cycle. Our skyscrapers will become sand. Our plastics will become minerals. Even our isotopes will eventually decay. In the end, we will not be remembered as builders of towers or launchers of rockets. We will be remembered, if at all, as a thin layer in stone. And then even that layer will be recycled into something new. Perhaps this is the Earth's quiet lesson. Permanence is impossible, but participation is universal. Civilizations may not last, but they become part of the story of the planet. They are not separate chapters. They are ingredients. We are clay, already halfway back to being clay. And maybe that is not tragedy, but continuity. To be erased is to be renewed. To be forgotten is to be reimagined. To be recycled is to remain, though in a different form. This reframing is oddly comforting. It means that even if others came before us, they are not gone completely. They are here in the ground beneath us, in the minerals of our buildings, in the dust we breathe. Their civilizations may have dissolved, but their atoms still participate in Earth's endless experiment. If we vanish, we will join them. Our debris scattered into future landscapes. Our bones repurposed into soil. Our monuments melted into magma. We will be forgotten, yes, but also carried forward. So tonight, as you lie in stillness, imagine the great cycle. Imagine cities collapsing into rubble, rubble becoming sand, sand compressed into stone, stone dragged into the mantle, mantle erupting again as lava. Imagine civilizations rising and falling like waves, each erased, each recycled, each folded back into the planet. Imagine that our story too will follow this rhythm, until even our most stubborn traces are transformed. And in that vision, take comfort, because though we may not endure as monuments, we will endure as matter. We will endure as part of the planet's song. And perhaps, just perhaps, the Earth has already sung this tune before. Other civilizations, other voices, erased and recycled into the silence we now ponder. After all the searching, all the wondering, all the wandering through stone and silence, what are we left with? Not certainty, not proof, not monuments of the forgotten or messages from the past. We are left with a question. And perhaps that is the most human inheritance of all. Maybe we are the first. Maybe Earth nurtured forests and oceans and animals for billions of years. But intelligence bloomed only once here and now in us. If so, then our story is unprecedented. Our fingerprints on the planet are unique. The Anthropocene is the first epoch of its kind. We are pioneers, the first to ask, the first to alter, the first to wonder if others might have come before. Or maybe we are not. Maybe others did rise quietly, briefly, differently. Maybe they built no towers, left no plastics, carved no monuments, and so slipped into silence without leaving us anything we could recognize. Maybe they were erased by flood, fire, or famine. Maybe their traces are buried in subducted crust, disguised as volcanic residue, or scattered in myths we dismiss as fiction. Maybe we walk every day across their bones and ruins, never knowing. Both possibilities are humbling. If we are first, then the responsibility is enormous. To shepherd a planet that has never known such beings before. To leave a legacy that honors our chance. If we are not first, then the humility deepens. We are participants in a cycle, not pioneers, but inheritors. One more echo in a long unfinished song. Science will not give us a clear answer. It resists certainty where evidence is absent, and rightly so. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary proof, and so far there is none. But absence is not emptiness. Silence is not confirmation. The Earth's record is too patchy, too restless, too fond of erasure to give us confidence either way. The question remains unanswered because the answer may be unknowable. And yet, perhaps that is the gift. If the Earth told us clearly, you are the first, our curiosity might dim. If it told us, others came before you, we would only hunger for details it could not provide. But in silence and uncertainty, imagination blooms. We fill the gaps with stories, with myths, with questions that stretch our minds across deep time. We search not because we expect proof, but because the search itself is worth it. Humor sneaks in even here. because otherwise the weight is too much. Imagine earlier civilizations, if they existed, watching us now, shaking their ghostly heads. Oh no, not plastic again. We tried that. Didn't end well. Or imagine us as the punchline in some cosmic joke. Intelligence always invents straws, always floods itself with carbon, always wonders if it was first. The cycle repeats not as tragedy, but as comedy, played out across millions of years. But beyond the humor is a softer truth. The question matters not because of its answer, but because of what it reveals about us. To ask whether we are the first is to admit our fragility, our impermanence, our awareness that time dwarfs us. It is to recognize that intelligence may not guarantee permanence, that civilizations may vanish as easily as footprints in sand. It is to confess that we want to be remembered and to face the possibility that we may not. So tonight, as your thoughts slow, let the question settle gently. Maybe we are the first. Maybe we are not. Maybe intelligence blooms rarely. Or maybe it blooms often but briefly, erased before it can endure. Maybe Earth has carried more minds than we will ever know. Maybe we are a lonely miracle. Maybe we are part of a chorus. The silence will not say. The stone will not confess. The ocean will not explain. The earth is patient, and its memory is selective. It will keep some whispers, erase others, and leave us with a record that is always incomplete. But in that incompleteness lies the wonder. We may never know the full story, but in the act of asking and the act of wondering, we join it. And so we end not with an answer, but with a stillness, with the image of civilizations, real or imagined, rising and falling like tides, erased but not meaningless, with the thought that intelligence, however brief, is part of the Earth's rhythm, with the possibility that somewhere in silence, in stone, in myth, there are echoes of others. Maybe we are first, maybe not. The Earth does not tell us, but it allows us to wonder, and in that wonder, we find our place in deep time. And as you close your eyes, drifting into your own silence, let the question carry you, not as fear, not as certainty, but as a gentle reminder that we are temporary, fragile, and miraculous all at once. The Earth may erase us, but for now we are here, and that is enough.